Hi, welcome to Speaker Secrets. My name is Susie Q, and this is a series where we bring you leading experts in many fields of communication to help you have new tools, understandings, and techniques that you can use to communicate for a more fulfilling life. And today I am very honored to have Sarah Peyton on the show. She works with NVC and is a CNVC certified trainer. Offers trainings focused on learning and using resonant language to transform the brain and heal trauma. She brings together a depth of work and self-compassion that integrates interpersonal neurobiology with healing potential of nonviolent communication, this verbal and nonverbal empathy. She teaches and lectures internationally, and she has a new book out called Your Resonant Self, Guided Meditations and Exercises to Engage Your Brain's Capacity for Healing. That all sounds absolutely amazing. And Sarah, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Susie. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. So I'm curious, I would love to know a little bit about your background and how you came to do the work that you do now.
Oh, this work of bringing together language and the way it changes our brain and how it heals trauma has been of great interest to me ever since I ran into nonviolent communication. I thought, oh, this is wonderful work. It will transform the world. It will let people do social justice. And then I went to a nonviolent communication retreat, and I had a life-changing experience where personal trauma was healed. I couldn't hug my son, and people were making resonant language guesses for me, and I was like, wow, I'm understanding myself in a whole new way. And there was like a click and an understanding of the way that past trauma had impacted me. And I was like, oh my God, I can imagine hugging my son. And it was my world was blown apart. I was like, language? What? Language can heal us? How is this even possible? And that started me on this whole neuroscience journey of investigating and understanding the latest and newest research about how our brains affect each other. So it's magical stuff.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So can you explain to us what exactly resonant language is? And I mean, you shared a little bit just from that brief history, but like, how have you found it most beneficial when put to use?
Uh-huh. Well, nonviolent communication, you had mentioned that your listeners have heard a little bit possibly about nonviolent communication before me. So
Yeah.
a little bit of a sense that we talk about feelings, we talk about needs, longings, desires, deep yearnings, and that this combination allows us to communicate in ways that are essentially not conveying judgment, not telling other people that they're wrong. It's quite extraordinary that we get to have a way to be with each other and not blame each other, because blame is really like the number one communication style when we're not thinking about things. The most likely thing we're going to do is blame somebody. So, so I thought, on this journey, I was like, okay, what just happened? How was I healed by language? And I discovered that there was new research that was coming out about how when we name emotions, our brains calm. And so I started to investigate what part of our brain calms when we name emotions. And it turns out that the right hemisphere and its connection to the body is what calms, that we become much calmer when we name what's really happening. And that when this happens, there's a kind of a full body movement towards flexibility and self-understanding and self-compassion that just starts to happen. So I was like, what are the other kinds of language that awaken the right hemisphere? And it turned out that when we use poetry, poetry awakens the right hemisphere.
Beautiful.
Yeah, visual imagery awakens the right hemisphere. Stepping into a place of wondering if 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 somebody longed for something that wasn't possible, what would that be? So the left hemisphere is like our get it done hemisphere, and it's like to-do lists and functioning, and it's really all about the possible. And it's the part of us that starts to speak when we want to give our best friend advice, like our best friend has had a terrible breakup with a partner that we thought was bad for them. We just want to tell them, you never go towards that person again. Do not hang out with them. That is not good for you. That is our left hemisphere. You can hear the blame. You can hear how I am blaming partner X. Yeah. And whereas, stepping into resonant language would be kind of, instead of face to face with somebody telling them what to do, we're kind of moving into being beside them. And we're like, oh man, I wonder if you are so torn. If you just really can tell that there are things about this relationship that are not good for you, and things that you really, really are moved by and they're really important to you, which is like this whole different way to be with people. So, and then the impossible dream guess, would you love it if a magical surgeon could go in and excise all the parts of this person's brain that are not good for you, and you would then have just the things that you like? It's an impossible dream guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, it turns out, is the right hemisphere. It's creating a resonant space. So resonant language means that in some way our language is capturing a bit of what it's like for the other person to be them, instead of telling them what to do or blaming somebody or telling them what's wrong or telling them to think about it differently. It's moving into this side-by-side space, which has got a really different feeling in our communication.
I love that you said about, instead of in front of them telling them what to do,
Mhm.
sitting next to them,
Mhm.
and I love that, like resonating and capturing a little bit of their essence of what's going on for them. So,
Mhm.
because a lot of times when we can speak it, like even when you're with a friend and they're talking out their problems, or you're helping them talk out their problems, they're able to actually hear the solutions better as you talk it out, as you get into that space. Is that kind of a similar thing?
Yeah, and when they come up with the solutions themselves,
Mm-hmm.
that's what's really important, is that it's like when somebody resonates with us, then our own problem solving brain starts to come online. And it, you know the what it finds is going to be much better than what I find for it. What my friend comes up with themselves about their own life is going to be way more important than all the ways that I think I could tell them to live their lives where they would be happier and more well. So it's an accompaniment. It's a question of accompaniment rather than fixing.
Yeah, because nobody actually even needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I know.
you know so it's just a matter of how you want to go about living your life and handling your problems.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the nervous system and how it can affect communication, uh, even like at a subconscious level, but also
Mhm.
how, I mean, it's the nervous system, so it's affecting you at a physical level.
Yes, yes. This is what's so fun, is that as we begin to accompany one another, as we begin to move into resonant space, we're starting to create what Stephen Porges calls, he's one of the researchers into the nervous system and the vagus nerve, he calls it a neuroception of safety. So it's not even a perception, it's below the level of perception. It's like our very neurons, our very body says, oh yeah, Susie Q is actually listening to me. We are connecting. Her face is responding to me. Her voice is responding to me. I am safe. I can say things. I can express things. They'll be caught. And there's this kind of dyadic experience, and we can do it, as you and I are doing it together. We're creating something, but we can also create it with a large audience where we're broadcasting, I feel safe. I feel like I matter. I can tell that my voice is important here, and I got some stuff I really want you to know. From that point of view, then our voice is alive. Our whole nervous system shifts state. And this is tricky and intense because, of course, one of the things that makes humans most nervous is the thought of speaking before a large audience. Social neuroscientists, in order to stress their neuroscience subjects, will tell them, please imagine that you're about to make a speech before a large audience.
And it works, right?
And their heart rate goes up and their blood pressure goes up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So but when we're in that space of having a sense of engagement, then all of a sudden um, we're conveying that. And when we convey that, it engages every other nervous system in the room. When there's an aliveness and an engagement and a presence, and you can tell from various both verbal and nonverbal cues. So verbally, is the person making sense? Are they kind of logically laying stuff out in a way that I can track? But on a nonverbal level, there's so much happening. Is their face alive? Especially the area right here. Is there a little bit of a lift and an aliveness around the eyes? That's an area that's not controlled consciously. I can control what my mouth does, but I can smile with my mouth when my eyes are sad. And you can see the incongruity of the facial expression. When the area around the eyes are engaged and there's that lift in the muscles, then you can tell that a person is engaged. And then there's a part of the brain that's going, yeah, their voice, their vocal tones, their gestures, their facial expressions, all of it is giving me a congruent picture that my speaker is engaged and present in this experience. So we're holding ourselves with gentleness because, of course, as we know, speaking publicly is one of the most stressful things humans can do. So I think the more we bring in a little bit of a sense of humor about that, that there's like a prerequisite for successful speaking, that we're not be scared, and at the same time it's one of the scariest things we can do. If we put those together, we have a bit of a sense of humor that also awakens our nervous system. and and there's so many changes that happen with the nervous system change from fight or flight or alarmed aloneness or freeze into social engagement. And one of the things that changes is this feed to the fine muscles of the face. The eyes actually focus on the human face. And when our eyes focus on the human face, the muscles of the middle ear tighten exactly to the sound range of the human voice. And when we tighten to the sound range of the human voice, the muscles around the larynx open up and expand and become more flexible to support an expanded emotional expression. As opposed to when we're afraid, our vocal muscles are trying to prepare to convey screams, or angry, rage, or alarmed aloneness, calling for the person that we're missing. Where are you? All of those things are supported by a different configuration of vocal muscles. So we're so complexly made for communication. We are beautifully and precisely made for safe, connected communication.
Wow, that I had no idea that all of that was going on with, you said, the ears and the throat and
And
all of it.
the
It's
eyes and
all,
the
the
facial
eyes
muscles.
all
Yeah,
connected. Yeah. Wow, that's really amazing.
yeah.
Now, I love that word that you used, neuroception.
Mm.
That it's like beneath perception. It's like where it's at a cellular level that you're experiencing this safety.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned briefly the vagus nerve. Can you talk a little bit more about that and that function?
Sure. The vagus nerve is this large bundle of nerve tissue that runs in front of the spinal column and behind the heart. And it connects everything from our torso, all of our organs, our intestines, our digestive tract, our stomach, our lungs, our heart. It all is sending information up to the brain. And 80 to 90% of these fibers that are in the vagus nerve are running from the body up to the brain through the brain stem and giving us our information about how we're doing in the world. Much more than we realize, we're decoding what our body's reading about whether or not we're safe and we matter. So we're listening to it's like we're listening to our own breath. It's one of the ways we can sort of hack our own experience of safety is by breathing. And if we breathe in for fewer counts than we breathe out, if we breathe in for 3, we breathe out for 5. then we're giving our body, we're, we're intentionally breathing, but we're giving our nonverbal body a cue that we're safe, which then helps to bring everything else alive. I have a friend who's a music teacher, and she teaches her kids this breathing and has them do it for 5 breaths before they perform their musical instruments for their recitals or whatever. And and she says it's so fun to talk to them about what they can, the difference they can feel before and after, and how much more engaged they are in their own performance and enjoy their own performance. Because of course we enjoy our speaking much more if we have a sense of mission and safety and importance and engagement. You know, there's just an enjoyment for what we bring to the world when we're able to play the body instrument, you know, the way it's supposed to be played when we have a neuroception of safety.
Yeah, that has me thinking about the relaxation actually happens on the exhale. And that's why the exhale would be longer, to
Yeah,
give
and
the body
also,
more of a chance to relax.
yeah, and there's a pressure that we're putting onto the vagus nerve itself, onto one of the nodes of the vagus nerve, that when we're in the exhale, we're putting pressure on this node of the vagus nerve that's a safety signal, so that we do relax more with the exhale. And we relax more with the exhale because we're sending the body, I mean, if we're in danger, we don't have time to exhale. We're like, let's run. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever fear or that type of nervous system hits into the fight or flight, like immediately the depth of the breathing is much shallower, and it's fight or flight, or
Yeah.
and you said fight, flight, or freeze.
Fight, flight, freeze are what we generally hear the most about, but there's another one that we don't hear so much about, that's alarmed aloneness. And alarmed aloneness is a sympathetic activation. If you think about a baby that's lost its mother, the mother's not coming and the baby's crying frantically, or a toddler who has just been separated from the mother in preschool and they're just screaming for their mother. This is not a relaxed state. This is not a helpless state. This is not an immobilized state. This is not a freeze state. But it's not anger, it's not fear, it's not fight or flight. It's something else that we don't usually name and that we need to begin to name. I travel all over the world and teach all over the world, and there's often this huge exhale of relief in the crowd when I say, and one of the states of sympathetic activation is alarmed aloneness. We can be really upset when we're alone, and it's important to name it, because it's a state that we leave out of language. We just say fight, flight, freeze, as if that's all there is, instead of actually connecting with this third state of possibility of alarm, which is when somebody we love disappears. Of course, this is the essence of those terrible heartbreak experiences that we have when we lose a partner, either to death or to breakup, and we're like, what just happened? And there's this kind of state of shock that it's really hard to come out of, because what brings us out of shock is resonance. So when we have the capacity to move into naming, you know, this might be alarmed aloneness, then I have this experience in the room where people are starting to come out of a frozen state they may have been in for years because it's never been named. They're like, oh my God, yes, alarmed aloneness.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I was 19 years old, my high school sweetheart died. And I remember going through that and having like very much mourning. But now as I look back, I was like, oh, it is that alarmed aloneness, you know, because it wasn't that I was scared. It wasn't. So what was so interesting for me there was that it was the first death I had dealt with, which was a young person. I was used to old people dying, you know, my grandparents dying, or, you know, their friends or great aunts or uncles. But that was the first time it was a young person, and a young person so close to me that that it just really rocked me in that way. So I'm glad I now have another thing to help explain that. And then pass that on to people too, that is an actual thing that happens.
Yes, yes. And we can even, when we have these moments of shock, and this is very important for speaking, of course, because often what makes speaking so stressful is that there have been trauma moments, moments where we were humiliated, or we were told that we were wrong. We were asked by the teacher to stand up in front of the class, and then the teacher evaluates what we did and tells us how we were wrong. Well, you should have breathed more when you were speaking, Sarah, or you weren't speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. You know, I mean, you're already working so hard to be able to speak in front of the classroom, and then then your nervous system is like, oh, the horrifying thing that just happened was that I was speaking, and now I was humiliated, and I never want to speak again. It's not like the teacher was not doing a very good job of supportive
Right?
engagement there. The teacher scared the heck out of me by evaluating my very tender expression. I should never speak again. That's what the body believes, especially if it happens before the age of 9. We blame ourselves. So it's like we get up in front of people and we're stepping back into a trauma field, because the part of the brain that carries traumatic memory has no sense of time. It doesn't know that we were humiliated when we were 6 years old in first grade. It only knows that public speaking equals humiliation.
Wow, that's really huge.
Yeah,
That there's no timeline there, so it's not like you can be rational about it.
right.
It's oh, uh-huh. So are there certain types of language that we can use to create engagement and to create relationality between, I mean, in personal conversation, but then also when you're speaking to a larger group?
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about the nonverbals, the importance of having ourselves emotionally supported enough that we can really be in our mission, really be in our engagement. But and because the nonverbal is it's telling our audience there's something important here. This person believes this is important. They're engaged in it. So that's one piece of the puzzle. But in terms of the kinds of language we can use that bring nervous systems into engagement, there are, I've identified nine forms of resonant language that really bring nervous systems into an engaged space.
That's so cool. I'm excited to learn this. You guys get your pen and paper out.
So one of them is something we've been talking about before. It's the essence of nonviolent communication. Feelings and needs both light up the right hemisphere, both take us into relational space. If I say to you, it's nice to be here, that's sort of like everybody knows what that is. But if I say, oh, Susie Q, you inviting me to be a part of this series really lights me up, because it lets me be able to contribute to my mission. That's very different, right? It's more engaging. It's like tapping into what are my emotions, what are my needs, what are my longings, how are we working with one another's dreams.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's feelings and needs. Another thing is body sensations. You can test this out. You can tell somebody a story about what happened yesterday. Yesterday, I went to the store and I picked up some butter and some eggs and I went home. Absolutely boring. But if you say, yesterday I went to the store and as I was driving, I noticed that I had stopped breathing altogether. I think that I was really worrying about whether or not things were going to be okay when I got back home again. All of a sudden, there's a whole different level of engagement, right? We're bringing ourselves in to connection with the body sensations. It brings us into narrative. It brings us into story. It brings us into engagement, into curiosity. What happens next? What happens with this body? What happens when she gets home? Yeah. So body sensations are also one of the things that light people up. Impossible dream guesses. You can make impossible dream guesses for audiences. Wouldn't you love to live in a world where we all took care of this planet together, where everybody was completely 100% engaged? You know, these are the things. This is our third form of resonant language. Then we talked about poetry earlier. When we bring poetry in, poetic language, visual imagery lights people up. Fresh metaphors, really bring people to life when you, instead of saying, oh, that child is as good as gold, if you say instead, that child is sitting there as attentively as a cat watching a mouse, then all of a sudden, there's a whole nother. Are you starting to see?
I
These are
totally
all,
get
yeah,
that. Yeah,
these are all the right hemisphere ways of being with each other that bring us into relational space. Cuss words is another one.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Not the kind where you're blaming people, but the kind where you say, fuck yes. And that's like engaged. We're engaged.
Yeah,
Be a
yeah, and
little
you
careful
can.
with that. You can offend people, and I
Yeah.
hope I didn't offend anyone in your audience.
No, no, I think we're all good here. And you can accent things that you really want to make really like highlighted
Yeah.
by doing that, so that they know, like, oh, listen up, this is important.
Yes.
I'm engaged now, because
Yeah.
this person wouldn't be using that word unless it meant it was very deeply felt.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. It's how are we inviting body and imagination into the space with us? Another thing that I know we're coming towards our end here, but just the use of the word I and you in the same sentence makes a world of difference. You notice the next time you get bored, whether this person has ever, in their entire conversation with you, used a sentence that linked the both of you. Usually, if you're really bored, it means that person is only talking about themselves, or conversely, that they're only asking you questions about yourself and they're not sharing anything about themselves. What happens when we both enter the relational space? And as speakers for audiences, what happens when we enter the relational space of self with audience? What is it like to be I and you in that context as well? That's also something that's engaging. So we've kind of touched on all of our 9 impossible dreams we mentioned earlier. Yeah, so we've touched on our nine forms of resonant language there at hyper speed.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. And if you want to do you have that? That's in your book.
Yeah,
They're
that's in
all
my
in your
book.
book.
That's in my book, Your Resonant Self. There's a website for the book that's called yourresonantself.com without any spaces. And it's got a little video about the material. That's the animated video that's really cute.
Oh, cool. That definitely check that out, audience. And then I know you have a free gift for our audience. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. There's a link on the page here that takes you to the guided meditations that form the heart of this material, of integrating this material, of resonance for self. That there's this enormous change that happens when we begin not only to bring our resonance into our outer communication, but bringing resonance into our communication with ourselves. So if we hear ourselves saying, Sarah, you stupid idiot, why did you not blah, 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 then we can, instead of believing it as true, we can go, oh, critical voice, I wonder if you're really worried about Sarah, if you really want her well-being. It's a very different way of being with ourselves, and that's the heart of the book.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you on. That half hour went by like this. I was so engaged in everything that you're saying. And thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been so wonderful to have you. And audience, make sure that you click for the free gift from Sarah. And it's just a button on the page, and you can click that and get connected with her and her work. And so lovely to have you on the show, Sarah.
Oh, thank you so much, Susie Q. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. And thank you to all of our audience for tuning in to Speaker Secrets. Bye.